It happened when I was incredibly young, perhaps in second or third grade. Memories from that distant past often blur, but this one remains etched in my mind with a chilling clarity. It was a school day, marked by an incessant downpour, rain lashing against the windows with a furious intensity. After picking me up, my parents, dressed in their finest, departed for some upscale event, a fundraiser, a dinner party, the specifics now lost to the mists of time. Their plan was to return that same night, but the storm, as if with a malicious will of its own, intensified dramatically, transforming the roads into treacherous waterways. Driving long distances became unsafe. Reluctantly, they decided to spend the night at a friend's house, conveniently located much closer to their event. I remember the static-laced call on our old house phone, their voices filled with apologies, repeatedly expressing remorse for leaving me alone. I, in my innocent excitement, insisted I was fine, not even hungry, already envisioning a night of unsupervised freedom. My mom, however, ever the cautious one, gave me a list of tasks. Lock all doors and windows, keep at least one light on, ensure all blinds were closed. Typical precautions, yet I didn't grasp their full significance then. I was too young to truly comprehend the gravity of being left alone, too thrilled by the prospect of unlimited candy and no bedtime. My room, devoid of screens, offered no allure, so I settled into the living room, captivated by the flickering glow of the television. I promised myself I'd attend to my mom's list just before heading to bed, convinced I'd be up all night anyway. But the inevitable sugar crash arrived, a heavy, irresistible wave, and I drifted into an accidental sleep. I don't recall the exact hour I woke, but the TV had long since entered sleep mode, indicating at least 3 hours had passed. A distinct coldness permeated the air, a noticeable drop in temperature that immediately registered even to my young mind. It wasn't just the natural dip of night, this was significant. My first instinct was to curl back up, to succumb to the sweet oblivion of sleep, but then my mom's list flashed through my mind. I knew, with a certainty that only a child fearing parental disappointment possesses, that she would find out if I hadn't followed her instructions. The thought of getting in trouble after she trusted me with such responsibility was enough to override my exhaustion. With a groan, I forced myself off the couch, my small legs heavy, and began my meticulous inspection of the house. I moved from room to room, a tiny sentinel in the quiet darkness, systematically checking every window and door. The front and back doors clicked securely into place. The blinds, one by one, were drawn shut, cloaking the house in privacy. I even double-checked the lights, ensuring at least one remained on, a beacon in the gathering gloom. Everything was shut tight, just as she'd asked. Yet, the house remained unnervingly cold, far colder than it should have been. I pressed my hand against a couple of the windows, feeling for a telltale draft, a subtle crack, but they were all perfectly sealed. My young mind, seeking a logical explanation, settled on the most convenient one. The storm must have knocked out the heater. The thought made sense in my tired state, and I was too exhausted to dwell on it further. With my duties seemingly fulfilled, I headed upstairs, eager to crawl into bed and forget the lingering chill. As I ascended the stairs, the true ferocity of the storm became undeniable. The living room, nestled in the center of the house, had shielded me from its full wrath. But my childhood bedroom, with its large external window, offered no such sanctuary. The rain slammed against the glass, a relentless, percussive assault, as if trying to breach the very defenses of my home. Every minute or so, a blinding flash of lightning would tear through the darkness, followed by an almost instantaneous, deafening clap of thunder that rattled the very foundations of the house. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, not in the typical sense, but I distinctly remember a nascent fear taking root, the terrifying possibility of a massive tree crashing through the roof, engulfing our home. That worry, a concrete and immediate threat, was likely why sleep, despite my profound exhaustion just 20 minutes prior, now eluded me. I lay there, rigid in my bed, listening to the relentless drumming of the rain and the earth-shaking rumble of the thunder, my mind racing. Then, amidst the chaotic symphony of the storm, I began to pick up on odd, subtle sounds. Every so often, a strange creaking noise would punctuate the downpour, like shifting wood under strain. My entire room was carpeted, so I knew it couldn't be coming from inside my immediate space. My first thought was a tree swaying violently in the wind, its branches groaning under the pressure. But the sound didn't quite fit. Even then, young as I was, I knew the distinct sounds associated with thunderstorms, the roar of wind, the crackle of lightning, the boom of thunder. This creaking was different, a discordant note in the storm's natural rhythm, and it began to truly bother me. It wasn't the storm keeping me awake anymore, it was that persistent, unsettling sound. I couldn't take it much longer. I sat up, my eyes scanning the darkened room, not entirely sure what I was looking for, but desperate for an explanation. I strained my ears, trying to filter out the thunder and the rain, to focus solely on the unsettling creaking. A flash of lightning momentarily illuminated the entire room, painting it in stark, fleeting detail. Everything looked normal, but my eyes were drawn, almost instinctively, to the only wooden thing in the room, my closet. The room plunged back into darkness and I sat there, perfectly still, my breath held captive in my lungs. About a minute later, another blinding flash of lightning split the night, and my room was bathed in light once more, just for a split second. And in that terrifying, fractured instant, I saw something that made me choke on my own fear. The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before. I was 100% certain of it. Someone or something had opened it. A cold wave of realization washed over me, a chilling certainty. There was something in my room. I didn't scream. I didn't speak. I didn't even think. My body moved on instinct, fueled by a primal terror. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my movements slow and deliberate, and began the agonizing walk towards the door. That short distance from my bed to the bedroom door felt like a 500-mile, 5-year journey. Every step was a conscious act of will, each soft creak of the floorboards beneath my feet amplified into a thunderous roar in my ears. The moment I slipped out of my room, I immediately descended the stairs, not daring to look back, driven by an overwhelming urge to seek refuge in the darkest, most hidden corner of the house. I dove under the dining room table, its solid oak offering a flimsy, psychological shield against the unseen horror above. Only then, once I was truly concealed, did the dam break. A silent, uncontrollable torrent of tears streamed down my face. I didn't know what else to do. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were miles away, unreachable through the fury of the storm. I lay there, curled into a ball, my small body trembling, the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. I'm not sure how long I stayed under that table, suspended in a purgatory of terror, but at some point, a new sound pierced the oppressive silence. Footsteps. They were walking down the stairs, slow and deliberate at first, then growing closer, closer. I held my breath, my lungs burning, convinced that even the slightest sound would betray my hiding spot, would seal my fate. The footsteps were not normal. They sounded chaotic. Like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs, hitting each step with an uncontrolled, heavy thud. It was less a walk and more a staggered descent, a bizarre, unsettling rhythm that sent shivers down my spine. The footsteps grew closer, closer still. My breath hitched in my throat as they approached the dining room, moving with an eerie, unnerving precision, as if they knew exactly where I was hiding. The air beneath the table grew impossibly thick, suffocating. I really thought I was going to die. My small mind, overwhelmed by the sheer terror, could conjure no other outcome. And then, from under the table, I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, only their feet and legs. 2 bare feet, caked in nasty, wet mud, walked into view. The legs were tinted yellow, a sickly, unnatural hue. I couldn't tell if they were male or female, that's how gross and almost disfigured they looked. There were cuts all over their legs, angry red lacerations, as if they had stumbled and rolled through a thorny bush. They were also stumbling, swaying precariously, like they were struggling to even stand upright, their movements disjointed and unsteady. And just when I thought the horror couldn't possibly escalate, they dropped something. It was a wrench. The metallic clatter against the hard floor echoed in the silent house, a shockingly loud sound in the stillness. It took every fiber of my being, every ounce of childlike self-preservation, to fight back the scream that threatened to erupt from my throat. If that person bent down to pick up the wrench, they would definitely see me, cowering beneath the table. With wide, terrified eyes, I watched as the feet stood still, unmoving. They didn't bend down for the wrench, but they didn't walk away either. It felt like a standoff, a horrifying tableau where any wrong move, any sudden sound, could mean the end of my short life. The tension was unbearable, stretching thinner and thinner until it felt like it would snap. Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity suspended in terrifying anticipation, the bare, muddy feet resumed their stumbling gait. They walked away, disappearing from my limited view beneath the table. I remained frozen, straining my ears, listening as the chaotic footsteps stomped and stumbled around the first floor of our house. The sounds were erratic, unpredictable, a terrifying game of hide-and-seek where I was the desperate prey. The ordeal stretched on, each passing moment feeling like an hour, an endless eternity of dread. And then at last the unmistakable sound of the front door opening, followed by a soft, definitive click as it shut again. They were gone. The realization was a wave of pure, unadulterated relief so potent it left me weak and trembling. But despite the immediate relief, I remained hidden under that table for a long, long time. Part of it was lingering fear, a deep-seated dread that he might still be lurking, that the sounds of his departure were just another cruel trick. But another part of it was what I can only describe as profound trauma. I was at that tender age where I understood the immense danger I had just faced, the terrifying proximity of true evil, but I was nowhere near old enough to process or cope with such an experience. My small mind grappled with the enormity of it all, leaving me shaken and profoundly scared. The rest of the night remains a blur, a haze of exhaustion and lingering terror. Driven by an irrational need to erase all evidence of the night's horrors, I eventually crawled out from under the table. My eyes, still wide with fear, spotted the wrench lying glinting on the floor. I picked it up, my fingers recoiling from the cold metal, a desperate attempt to prevent my parents from ever finding it, from ever knowing what had transpired. After ensuring the front door was truly locked this time, a frantic double-check, I slunk back upstairs, my movements furtive and silent. I crawled into my bed, still drenched in a cold sweat, and somehow, miraculously, fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, a powerful fear of repercussions overwhelmed any desire to confess. I was terrified they would discover I hadn't locked the doors as instructed, that I had failed their trust. So, I kept the entire terrifying ordeal to myself, burying it deep within the confines of my young mind. It wasn't until several years later, well into my teenage years, that I finally mustered the courage to tell them the story. And even then, it took considerable convincing for them to believe me, so outlandish and fragmented were my childhood memories. Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful decision, a desperate act of self-preservation that ultimately prolonged my suffering. There was nothing that could have been done about the event itself, so far removed from the incident, but the emotional toll it took was immense. Frankly, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. From that night on, I slept with a nightlight, its soft glow a meager defense against the encroaching darkness. I developed a profound fear of the dark that clung to me for years, a constant, suffocating presence that refused to dissipate. Even now, decades later, I still struggle to fully explain what happened that night. The bare, muddy legs, the disfigured appearance, the chaotic stumbling, it all remains a chilling enigma. But one lesson was seared into my soul with terrifying clarity: lock your doors at night. Always, without fail. I was 15 when the next chilling incident unfolded, a particularly rainy Saturday night in May, just weeks before the liberating promise of summer break. I'm an only child, living with my mom and dad in a home that's arguably a bit too large for just the three of us. My parents, with a wry, long-running joke, always claimed it was never their intention to have only one kid. They just never got around to having more. This backdrop of quiet suburban life, however, often belied a deeper, more personal struggle for me. I've always battled a constellation of unusual medical conditions, frequent panic attacks that leave me gasping for air, a tendency to faint unexpectedly, and often a profound difficulty breathing. Beyond these physical challenges, there's another peculiar quirk of mine. I require absolute, total silence to fall asleep. Even the softest hum of a distant fan is enough to keep me wide awake, my mind racing in the oppressive quiet. I've largely learned to cope, but sleepovers and vacations remain an unbearable ordeal, constantly disrupting my delicate balance. People often wax poetic about the soothing sound of rain, how it lulls them into peaceful slumber. For me, it does the exact opposite. It doesn't rain often where I live, but every now and then, we experience these insane, torrential downpours that become my personal tormentors, keeping me awake all night, every single drop a tiny hammer blow against my fragile peace. To be fair, it wasn't a full-blown thunderstorm that night, but the rain was heavy enough to make sleep an impossible dream, no matter how hard I tried to block out the relentless patter against the roof. It was late, well past midnight, when I finally surrendered to the inevitable. Sleep was not coming. I slipped out of bed, a plan already forming in my mind: a walk in the rain. This wasn't a new impulse. My parents, understanding my unique sleep struggles, actually encouraged it. We lived in a very safe residential area, bordering a vast public park that was always well lit, making late-night strolls surprisingly comfortable and seemingly safe. I quietly pulled on my rain jacket, tiptoed downstairs, and stepped outside without bothering to grab an umbrella. I deliberately left my phone behind, knowing its glowing screen would only further sabotage any chance of rest. Outside, an unexpected tranquility settled over me. I've always found solace in nature, and the sight of the trees gently swaying in the wind, raindrops screaming down their branches, was exactly what my overstimulated mind craved. After about 20 minutes, a welcome wave of exhaustion washed over me. I turned around, starting the trek back towards my house, confident I'd be able to fall asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. As I cut through the park, my gaze drifted towards the road and I saw something strange. A long, black object lay flat in the middle of the street. My first thought was an oddly shaped garbage bag or some discarded debris. But the closer I looked, the more a sickening realization began to dawn on me. It was a person, lying face down, motionless in the middle of the street. A cold, nauseating feeling bubbled up in my stomach. The only thought ricocheting through my brain was the terrifying possibility that they had been hit by a car, injured, or worse. There was no other logical explanation for someone lying motionless in the street, especially in such a heavy downpour. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to keep my head down, to continue walking, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my parents had raised me differently. Ingrained in my very core was the imperative to help anyone in need. So, against every instinct for self-preservation, I started approaching the motionless figure in the street. As I drew closer, the dim ambient light, filtered through the thick rain, allowed me to make out what they were wearing: black pants and a dark plaid shirt. Definitely not the kind of attire someone would choose for a late-night stroll in a heavy rainstorm. Judging by the clothing, it was a man, which was what I had instinctively assumed. I'm not sure if it was the sheer gravity of the situation finally registering, or something else entirely, but as I walked towards the street, an intense cold permeated my body. It was as if the lukewarm rain had suddenly turned to ice, a jarring, almost inexplicable sensation. Just as I was closing in on the road, a blood-curdling screech ripped through the air from somewhere behind me. Instinct took over. I whipped my head around, adrenaline flooding my veins, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound was like a howl, but slightly off-key, like a wounded animal in immense pain. That's the only way I could describe it. A quick scan of the treeline, shrouded in the oppressive darkness of the rainy night, revealed nothing. The sound must have come from deeper within the park, suggesting no immediate, visible danger. Still, the sheer strangeness of it, the raw, primal sound, had my heart racing. I had never heard anything like it before, and the complete lack of an explanation, the eerie silence that followed, was what truly triggered that feeling of pure, unadulterated fear. But that feeling was about to get 1,000 times worse. Because when I turned back around and faced the street, the person wasn't lying down anymore. They were sitting perfectly upright, facing me, their head cocked at an unnatural angle, staring directly at me. In that horrifying moment, everything else started to fade. My vision narrowed, tunneling into the grotesque tableau before me. The only thing keeping me from passing out right there, collapsing onto the wet ground, was the muffled rhythmic symphony of 1,000 raindrops pattering all around me, a distant, comforting counterpoint to the terrifying silence emanating from the figure. Before I could even react, before my mind could process the impossible, the person stood up. And then he sprinted towards me. A demonic smile stretched across his face, a twisted, predatory grin that seemed to absorb all the light around it. And what's worse, he was holding something in his hand, what looked chillingly like a kitchen knife, its blade glinting even in the dim light. Up until that very moment, I hadn't truly understood what it meant to fear for your life. All my previous anxieties, my panic attacks, paled in comparison to this raw, visceral terror. I snapped out of my haze, my mind screaming, and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, turning sharply in the opposite direction. As soon as I started running, I heard him yell, "I'll kill you," at the top of his lungs, the words distorted by the wind and the rain, but unmistakable in their chilling intent. The wet grass made it impossible to run at full speed, my feet slipping and sliding, but my one saving grace was that whoever was chasing me would have to contend with the same treacherous conditions. I didn't want to lead him to my house, so I veered towards the denser part of the trees, hoping I could lose him in the park. I knew that was where the strange screech had just come from, a chilling thought, but I had no other choice, no other option for escape. I didn't look back once. My legs pumped furiously, my lungs burning, the instinct for survival overriding everything else. I just ran like my life depended on it, and considering the insanely cracked-out, deranged look on that guy's face, I was certain it did. I plunged into the thickest part of the woods, hoping the dense foliage and the deepening darkness would offer me a place to hide before he caught up. I didn't even know if he was still chasing me, but I couldn't stop, couldn't risk it. Part of me felt that if I stopped running, The sheer weight of the fear would finally catch up, and I'd collapse, passing out immediately. I finally made it deep enough into the woods, and just when I thought my lungs would burst from exhaustion, I ducked behind a massive oak tree, pressing myself against its rough bark, trying desperately to catch my breath. I risked a quick glance behind me. No one, or at least no one I could see in the oppressive gloom. The only thought pounding in my head at that point was a single desperate question. How in the world was I going to get home safely? I didn't feel comfortable moving, the threat still too palpable, too immediate. So, I waited there, a trembling bundle of nerves, listening to the relentless drumming of the rain and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I must have waited for at least 20 agonizing minutes before finally daring to step out from behind the tree. I decided on the longest route home, circling around the backside of the park, through a different section that eventually spat me out a few streets away from my house. No one followed me. The path remained silent, save for the patter of the rain and the distant, muffled sounds of the suburban night. I finally made it home, my body a shivering mess, and collapsed onto my bed, drenched and utterly traumatized. I never got an answer for anything that happened that night. That unearthly howl, the strange, wounded animal sound, is honestly what confuses me the most. I have a hard time believing it was somehow related to the man who tried to attack me, but the timing was just too coincidental, too unnerving. My most plausible, albeit unsettling theory is that the attacker heard the screech too, looked up, saw me, and then, for reasons unknown, decided to act on whatever dark impulse possessed him. As for his motivation, I have no idea. There are just crazy people out there. Maybe he was on drugs or suffering from a severe mental illness. I know it's not a real explanation, not a satisfying one, but I can't think of a better one. I still live in the same house today, and even though several years have gone by, it's hard not to think about this experience every so often, especially on rainy nights. The image of that demonic smile, the glint of the knife, and the chilling sound of his words, "I'll kill you," are forever etched in my memory. I'm 29 years old now, and one of the few things that truly helps me clear my head, that offers a profound sense of peace, is camping. Not the crowded campgrounds or bustling national parks teeming with other people. I'm talking true middle-of-nowhere camping, deep in the wilderness, where you can genuinely feel like the only person left on Earth. Growing up in Northern California, I've spent the better part of my adult life meticulously learning to find those remote, hidden pockets of solitude. This story took place a few months ago. I had just gone through a particularly rough breakup, and suffice it to say, I was going through it. I desperately needed to be alone, to escape the constant noise and emotional turmoil of my life. So one day, on a whim, I packed up my truck and just headed out. I didn't have a specific plan, no meticulously plotted itinerary. I simply threw some essential gear together and decided to revisit a quiet riverside spot I'd stumbled across once before. It wasn't an official campsite or anything, just a little bend in the river accessible by following a barely discernible dirt road that meandered past a whole lot of nothing. I arrived sometime in the late afternoon, but the second I turned down the dirt path that led to the river, my stomach sank a little. There were already 2 trucks parked near the trailhead, one gray and one white. I couldn't see anyone around, but just knowing other people were out there, intruding on my solitude, kind of killed the vibe for me. I hadn't driven all this way deep into the middle of nowhere to interact with strangers. I sat there for a second, debating whether I should just turn around and find another spot, but I eventually told myself it was a vast stretch of river. The chances were high that whoever owned those trucks were camped far enough away that I wouldn't even see them. I decided to press on. I hiked maybe 15 minutes further downriver, the sound of the flowing water a gentle accompaniment to my heavy thoughts. Up ahead, I spotted 2 guys fishing. They looked exactly like the type you'd expect to see, thick beards, a little overweight, heavy boots. But something about their posture, their intense focus, suggested they were more intent on something other than catching fish. As I got closer, one of them quickly covered something with his jacket, his movements a little too hurried. He then offered me an awkward, almost forced half-smile as I passed and called out, his voice unnaturally loud, something about just target shooting cans, and not meaning to freak me out. I gave a polite nod, not wanting to engage, and kept walking without saying anything. As I continued down the trail, I couldn't help but replay the guy's strained comment in my head. It wasn't even what he said that bothered me, it was the way he said it, rushed, awkward, almost as if he was trying too hard to sound casual. That familiar uneasy feeling, the one that tells you something doesn't quite add up, began to prickle at the back of my neck. But I pushed it down. People out here weren't exactly known for their social graces. It wasn't that weird for rural folks to be a little off when talking to strangers. I told myself to let it go and focus on finding a good spot to set up camp. I eventually found a spot a little further down the bend, where the trees were thicker and the trail dipped out of sight. It wasn't perfect, but it was tucked away enough that I finally felt like I had my own space, a small sanctuary in the vast wilderness. I set up my tent, pulled out a book, and tried to settle in. It started raining lightly not long after, a soft, soothing drizzle that quickly turned into a steady patter. I threw on my rain jacket and continued to read, letting the gentle murmur of the river and the soft rhythm of the rain drown out everything else.